Good morning, everyone. We're here today with Jasen Gundersen, and I'm Christine Johnson of Action Coach. Now, Jasen, thank you so much for being here today with us. I appreciate you being a part of this initiative. Can you start off by telling us what it is you do and how long you've been doing it?
Sure. I am the CEO of a startup company called Juan. We are a physician management company that works specifically with small independent cardiology groups around the country to provide full spectrum practice management support. So that's everything from electronic health record, revenue cycle management, remote patient monitoring, charge capture, practice optimization, and growth initiatives. And we're part of a parent company called Redesign Health. So that the company was started in the quarter one of 22. And I joined the company about 6 weeks ago as the CEO, and we have our first contract in implementation and a second one under MOU, hopefully getting to full agreement later this week.
Oh, exciting. Already hitting the ground running. All right.
It's been great.
Now, when you were growing up, is this what you thought you wanted to do? I see MD after your name.
I am a doctor, so I've had some twists and turns to what I thought I wanted to do. I think I said in about second grade I wanted to be a physician, so I stuck with that. I kind of wandered between wanting to go into more trauma emergency medicine, and then I was going to be a rural primary care doc up in like New England. I did do some primary care. I spent the majority of my career as a hospitalist and an ER doc, and I practiced until about 3 years ago. I've been in a full-time leadership role for a long time, but I've always kept some clinical duties until just before the pandemic. Job changes, and it just couldn't do it anymore.
Okay. And then as far as Juan, who is your ideal client?
So we are targeting independent cardiologists. Right now, we're targeting groups smaller than 10. There's about 6,500 cardiologists in the country that fit into that category of working in independent practices with less than 10 physicians. A lot of the cardiologists have been employed by large medical groups. And that's been frustrating for a lot of folks. I don't know that that's worked out as well as some folks had thought. So there's a subset of folks that have decided to stay independent. And in the way the current healthcare environment has been moving, everything from reporting to managed care contracting, a lot of the electronic record requirements, it's just a lot of work. We did a study of a little over 2,000 cardiologists when we launched our company. They spent on average 17 and a half hours a week on administrative tasks related to the practice. So I went to med school, I went to business school, so I like the leadership business side of it. But, for a lot of these folks that, did medical school, internal medicine residency, cardiology residency, sometimes subspecialty and interventional or others, working and covering payroll and rev cycle is not what they train to do. So we do it for them.
Yeah. We work with a couple physicians, we work with different kinds of offices. And the biggest thing is a physician's office, they've got that identity of they are a doctor, and being a business owner is completely out of their frame of reference.
Yes.
At least initially.
Yeah. And I think some of them are very entrepreneurial and like the growth side of it and doing new, innovative, physician or patient-centric kind of initiatives, but just the mechanics of like how to handle billing and all the components that come with it are just not. Actually, when I went to med school, like most training in medical school and or residency includes very little, if any, training in practice management. And so it's just been a challenge for most.
Well, there's definitely a gap that you guys can fill. Beautiful. So what's been the biggest learning since you've become a business owner or since you've moved to business?
I don't know. It's so I'll back up a little bit. So I was in a significant leadership role when I was at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And when I first went to business school, I was fascinated by kind of this whole Toyota method, standardization, like, you go to a Starbucks and the Starbucks kind of works the same no matter where they are. Healthcare is very local. And practice patterns, hospital politics, everything are very different. And so as I moved out of working just in my one market, and then I ended up covering in one of my roles when I was at Team Health, I covered 26 states, and I had 185 acute care hospitals and over 1,000 post-acute buildings. I had to quickly adapt to, as much as we wanted to standardize across the country, the healthcare system is not set up that way. There's a lot of regional, local, even regulations related to licensure, CME requirements, how we supervise nurse practitioners and PAs varies by state. It varies by hospital. So I had to learn, as much as I wanted to standardize, that I had to figure out how to standardize within the ecosystem that we were working. So if we were working in South Florida, it's a very different ecosystem than if we're working in the Pacific Northwest or in Oklahoma. And so that was, I think it was different. You come out and you're energetic and you're like, this is a great way to do it. And you're like, oh, they do it very different here. So I actually like that part now. I travel all the time. And so having worked in different environments, they all have their opportunities and their challenges, and figuring out how to leverage those is really I think kind of the fun part now.
That's actually some great information for our local business owners who are looking to expanding out of the current markets that they're in into other states, that there's going to be challenges
even in the
local communities.
Even in the Florida market, the Southeast Florida market is very different than Orlando. Orlando and Tampa kind of blend together. Jacksonville's totally different. So you have to learn, everything from pay rates, physician compensation rates in Palm Beach County change dramatically the second you step into Martin County. It's remarkable, even within a state. And so then you move around. So yeah, I think you just have to learn how to make your businesses adapt. There's been a number of examples, especially healthcare companies, that have been successful in the South Florida market due to the kind of hyper competitive nature, much more risk tolerant nature here, that have struggled when they've moved into other parts of the country.
Yeah, that's definitely great insight for our business owners. So then what would you say is the future? What does the future look like for you? And what do you see as the main challenges moving forward?
The future is we continue to grow and, expand at an exponential rate. I think always the challenges right now are interesting. So I think some of the challenges that I would say, obviously the economy right now is a particularly challenging environment. We are a private company in the investor world. So a year ago, for people that were looking for private equity or venture capital funds, I used to say people were giving it out kind of like Tic Tacs. Everyone was like, you could kind of raise money pretty easily. Those capital markets have changed dramatically over the last year. And so I think with interest rates where there are and cost of capital being high, I think the companies that are reliant on capital to grow, in other words, companies that are buying other companies as part of their growth strategy, it's going to be harder for them to do that now, just because the cost of the capital is just so much higher. So I think there's going to be changes there. We are capital efficient, so we don't require much. So we'll be focused on growing, and just working through kind of getting ourselves to our fundraising milestones and moving forward. Building a team out. So we're small, so there were 4 of us. We're adding 2 on the leadership team, and then we're going to add 5 more. Actually, I'm flying out tomorrow to meet another 5 that'll join us kind of at the local practice level. So as you build an organization, my last, the one team I had when I was with the company, I say team, but Team Health, it sounds redundant, but we were large, like thousands of people in my area. And so we had a really strong culture and very committed group. So now it's exciting to build a culture from the ground up, not have to inherit it and adapt it. And so it's just making sure we have the kind of right people on board that are excited about where we build as we go forward.
So there's a lot coming in the future. A lot of growth, a lot of team development.
It's fun. I've always liked building things from the ground up, and trying to do things. I don't think it's always approaching things slightly differently. Healthcare is not very innovative. It's kind of funny. People talk about innovation in healthcare, and it's, I equate it to like when Apple came out with an iPhone in a different color. Everyone's like, oh, it's so innovative. I'm like, well, it's probably not, but healthcare is just much slower to change. So trying to figure out how to find new ways through, and plus it's a very regulated environment from,
Yeah.
governmental regulation. So yeah, there's a lot we're working through. Building the team's exciting. There's a lot of energy and, excitement about where we're going and momentum. So just capitalizing that and driving it forward.
Yeah. Are you primarily Florida based right now?
I live in Florida. Our two practices are not in Florida. So we have one in the DC metro area and the next one coming on in the Texas market. So I've always, I've been a road warrior since I left even when I was at UMass, I ran my own consulting shop. So I traveled, but I've been a road warrior for a long time. So hoping to land something in South Florida, but we go where the business is and where the opportunities are.
Oh, beautiful.
It's a nice place to come home to on the week, when you fly back.
Definitely is. I flew back in last night.
It's great. And we have lots of airports, which makes it easy for people to travel all the time. That's what I migrate between airports depending on delays and travel.
And where I'm going, absolutely. Where I can get that direct flight.
Exactly. That's a huge advantage for us down here.
Yeah. Okay. So what would you say to someone thinking about going into business for themselves? You've transitioned from leadership in corporate America to building a business. What would you say?
I think you have to figure out one, why you're doing it. Right. I think that's probably the biggest component. It's like, so what motivates you to go into business for yourself? Like I've met people and they're like, well, I have to start my own business. I'm like, okay, well, why do you want to do that? And well, I want to sell and make a lot of money. I'm like, well, most startups actually don't necessarily do that. So I think you have to figure out like what it is you want to do by kind of getting in, especially in a startup environment. But if you have a bigger business, it's one thing. But if you're in a startup environment, you have to figure out like what it is that drives you there. And are you comfortable with the risk? So a startup environment like I work in is high risk, right? We got to get it off the ground and get it funded and grow. And there's all these milestones to hit. And, when you work for a much larger company, you have a lot more security in that, but you also have a lot more constraints. So I think you have to figure out your personality type and figure out where you thrive. I've seen people like I actually don't do like I always kid with people that I think people that work for me, I have great teams, but I'm a terrible employee. And I say that with some sarcasm, just because I follow, shouldn't say rules, but I don't just follow things because everyone says we have to do it that way. I'm always pushing, and not in a very respectful way, but I'm always like, why do we do that? And I think you just have to be, if you're going to be in a startup environment and building your own company, you've got to constantly be asking yourself, why do we do that? And you have to ask yourself that, like, why are we doing that? Yeah. Like, is that really a good idea? Because a lot of people kind of get sold on their own ideas or the way they do things. I always describe it as the fall of the BlackBerry. The CEO of the BlackBerry was convinced that people would not give up the keyboard on their BlackBerry. And he held on to that keyboard until the company tanked because, like I had to admit, like I was like, I'm not getting rid of my BlackBerry because I like the keyboard. I didn't really like the iPhone thing. But, that's where that's what you have to be aware of. Like companies that constantly adapt and say, maybe we should change what we are doing. Like always looking at why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Asking it, but you have to ask yourself that. So I think that's what drives people into more of the startup environment. I think leadership in general, I have a lot of doctors that say, well, I want to get into a leadership role. And I was like, why? Because I always ask that question. And they're like, because I want to work less and make more money. I'm like, that is a complete misnomer. You're going to work more and make less. And they're like, so that's
we work with clients on that. But
I hear it people all the time, like, I want to work less and make more money. I'm like, well, don't go into the leadership admin side. It's not going to work out for you. So it cracks me up when people say that.
Yeah, we do have positions where like, shifting that mindset and getting them to realize that, like we say, a successful business is a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you. And that's a huge mindset shift for physicians because they're like, how can my practice work without me? How can my practice generate revenue without me? And it is a huge shift.
I think from leadership in general, like you always have to have a team that like you have to build the team, not that it's dependent on you. Like you should, I mean, like clearly we have to add value as the person that's driving it, but I should be able to go away and or go on vacation and my team should be able to cover. And like if I can't make a meeting, I kind of expect my team to be able to just jump in and cover it. And if I always have to be there, I don't know that they would like working as much, right? People like autonomy, people like growth, people want to be able to like step into bigger and bigger roles. And I think some of the things I've seen the most beyond like, you can pay and comp people, everyone wants money, but everyone forgets about that pretty quick. People remember the opportunities that were given to them. Someone that got to go to, I couldn't make a big business development meeting and, my CFO ran it and comes back and was like, oh, it's great. It's growth opportunities, just like I wanted to grow at some point. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And you had shared like really getting into the why you want to do something. Like that's also what can pull you forward when you are challenged with so many challenges that come up in owning a business. Like why you're doing what you're doing could be kind of like the compass that keeps you going when there's frustrations in hiring and frustrations in finances, but your big why keeps you going.
It's interesting when I just make decisions along the way, people, I think everyone gets fascinated by all the excitement part of it, but I also go I always look for what are the traps that are going to catch us. So some of the things, worked with some great advisors and coaches along the way. And I've had, sometimes I've had a couple opportunities to look at and I'm all excited about all of them. That's just the nature of my personality. And they're like, okay, well, what are the deal killers? And I'm like, well, this is great. And they're like, okay, let's go back. What are the 3 things that you have to have? No matter how great it is, if you don't have that, you're not going to work there. And when you pivot it that way, like, this is so great, but it requires me to, I don't know, move to the Midwest. And I'm like, I'm never living in the Midwest. So, you're kind of like, well, that's really not an opportunity, as great as it may be, because it steps on some of the things you won't do. And so I think you have to know all the things you like to do, but all the things that are like, yeah, that's not going to work. Yeah. I never really thought of it that way. And someone pointed out, I'm like, I was all excited about this one opportunity that I was chasing. And someone made me run through like the things. I'm like, well, I wouldn't do this and this and this and that. And they're like, well, that has 3 of the 4. Why are you even talking about it? I'm like, well, it's great. They're like, but it has 3 of the 4. And you're like, oh, okay.
So getting clear on what you do want and things that
what you don't
clear
want.
You do not want. Yeah, absolutely.
I've made some like, I wouldn't call it. I did, I had what I call MBA-itis when I first got my MBA, and I was, getting older. I was a younger doc, and I wanted to have a C-level job, so I became a chief medical officer for a community hospital. That is so not my personality, interests, or anything. And I got into it, and I was like, oh no, and I was just like, I hadn't really kind of worked out like what it is that I really like to do and what it is that I don't like to do, because that job made me do all the things that I didn't like and none of the things that I did like. So I've learned I give a lot of people, I talk about my goofs along the way, opportunities for career, learning and growth. So that was a couple of them.
Yes, everything is a lesson or a blessing.
Exactly.
Yes. Beautiful. All right. So I was going to say, what have you learned about yourself? You shared a little bit about that.
I've done a lot of assessments along the way. I think they're very helpful. Like, everything. I mean, beyond just the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, I've done the Hogan, California. I've done a whole bunch of those kind of assessment, professional development ones. And, they're interesting. They give you a lot more insights, and you have to try to work through those because we all have kind of aptitudes and things, challenges. As soon as the more you know about that, just saw this really interesting lecture by Duke Gingrich. Everyone, politics here or there, gave this great lecture in healthcare transformation. And he talked about the back of your t-shirt. I still remember this. I was at this lecture and I was like fascinated by it. It's like everybody walks around with the t-shirt with what's written on the front, right? Like I'm a doctor. But the back of the t-shirt's kind of what people say about you when you leave the room, and not enough people think about the back of their t-shirt. Everybody forgets what's on the back. And so it's really interesting kind of thing as a leader, like when you walk around, like what do people like? You got to be comfortable with what's written on the back of your t-shirt and know what's there. So it's a very interesting, I never really thought of the analogy, and I was like, so I use that a lot when I talk to people.
That's where those 360 evaluations come into
Oh yeah,
play.
they're hard to read sometimes. People are like, oh, I don't do that. I'm like, listen, perception is reality. If someone wrote it down, they clearly perceived it.
Yeah. And yeah, like you can choose to do something with that or not. Like if that's how you want to lead people, then you do something about it. You could try it on and say, you know what? I'm
Yeah,
okay with that impact.
you adapt and grow with it.
Yeah. All right, beautiful. Last question. Are there any special offers that you'd like to share, or maybe something that you're doing that a potential client might want to know about? You're speaking to those physician practices out there.
And, physician practices that are looking to either maintain or reclaim their independence and kind of have someone work with them to kind of offload the administrative tasks. Give me a call. Love to talk to everybody. I think that there's a lot, I think people have drifted towards employment models, and there's a lot of growing kind of dissatisfaction is maybe not the word, or frustration with some of those models where physicians have not seen kind of the level of autonomy, and it's more of a job and not as much of a career as it used to be. I think you see some of the generations of docs that had their practices and they were very proud of them and they grew them and they loved it. And so I think we need to find that balance where people feel that kind of connection to their career, and not just I come in, I do my X, Y, and Z. And so we're trying to kind of maintain that. And I don't tell docs how to practice. I'll give them the tools to help them bill better, or get scheduling. One of my components is always focusing on the patient experience. So if you need to, one of the metrics that I really stress with our practices and everybody else is appointment availability. So if you need a cardiologist, you don't particularly want to call around and wait, right? So if your doctor says, hey, you need to see a cardiologist, you don't want to wait a week. You kind of want to see someone same day. So we're really focused on kind of access. I think it's getting back to what patients need. So long-winded answer on that. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Well, thank you. Well, Jasen, thank you for your time today. Anyone that's in the physician, or any physicians with smaller practices, please reach out. Oh, Jasen, how do they find you?
You can find me. My email is pretty simple. It's Jasen, Jasen, at cardio1.com, or you can hook us up on the website, www.cardio1.com, or grab me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn and make a lot of connections that way.
All right, beautiful. Jasen, thank you so much for your time. And I'm Christine Johnson with Action Coach, and I hope you enjoyed today's interview.